Chapter 1. The Hunt. There was still a full sun when my father and I began our journey home the afternoon that my story begins, and the jungle sand outside of the shade burned hot on our bare feet. There were a few clouds floating in the sky, but there was little chance for rain. The old men said that it had been one of the worst dry seasons in their memory. Our village had not seen many days of rain, and my mother's garden was not doing well, so that particular hunt was more important than others before it. We were in the jungle on a hunt for food, as well as to teach and to learn. My father had been teaching me since I was very small on how to read animal tracks and signs along the trail so that I could someday track them, but he had never let me go with him on a hunt before that day. Yet after much pleading on my part, and much talk from my mother, my father gave in and let me go with him on what was my very first hunt. "Timby, you know it will be good for you both if Kimbo learns to hunt meat for this family." Despite the years that have passed, although I no longer remember the sound of her voice, I can still remember my mother's words to him. We left very early that morning, while everyone else was still asleep, just as the sun broke through the darkness, but before there was a shadow on the ground. There were few animals worth hunting near where we lived because of the dryness, so we had to walk for a long while to get to the place where a man could hunt like they did in the old days, as my father would often say. In the tradition of our ancestors, when a boy went on his first hunt, my father and I carried with us only one spear and a little bag filled with a small amount of food to eat. If we would return with meat, Father would take me to the village elders, and they would put a blue tattoo above my left eye, just as they did to my father many years before. The tattoo looked like the claw marks of a lion, a symbol used by my people for the sign of a hunter and warrior. My father talked a great deal about the old days as we walked, but I didn't hear much of what he said because I was so busy thinking of what we might find on the hunt. I don't mind telling you now that I was scared. In spite of Father being nearby, the thought that we might face a hungry lion on his own hunt for food, with only one spear between us, frightened me very much. I'd had dreams of that day, my first hunt, ever since I was a smaller boy, and very often in my dreams I would see a big yellow lion waiting for me. But, blessings be to God, I always woke up before my fight with him, and I was glad to awaken because it was a troubling sleep. I stopped to point out some tracks in the dirt. The tracks were made by a pack of wild dogs who were heading across the dry flatlands, and my father got down on one knee to show me by the marks in the dirt that one of them had a wounded leg that he was dragging. Patting me on the back, he smiled and assured me that we would be taking food home to our family this day. We tracked the animals for most of that morning, across the plains and into the bush country. Always ready to teach me, Father pointed out that the bush had seen recent rain, because so many of the green plants had new leaves sprouting on their branches. He took care to show me many things that day, and it was probably the closest he and I had ever been to one another. When we finally caught up with the wounded animal, we could hear a loud commotion up ahead as he was being attacked by the other dogs in his pack. There is little room for mercy in the animal kingdom for those who are not strong. Father told me to raise my arms high into the air and scream as loud as I could to scare away the other dogs. He did the same and threw a few stones at them, and just like he said, the pack of snarling animals quickly ran away from us, leaving the wounded dog behind, who was now too tired to run. As I looked at him lying there, curled up in a ball, I saw that he was shaking, and his sad eyes followed my every move. I couldn't help but feel pity for the creature, but Father handed me the spear and told me that I had to finish what the other dogs had started. I looked at my father, and then back at the dog, not wishing then to harm the animal.
"It is for his own good now that he is wounded, Kimbo, and since the animal must feed someone, it is right that it should be us, because we are of greater value than dogs or whatever animals may come upon him now."
My father was right, and with my mother and sisters counting on us to bring home food, with one thrust I plunged the spear deep into the quivering animal, and it was finished just that quick. My eyes were moist, but I did not cry, so that my father would see it and perhaps then think less of me. Father wasted no time hoisting the dead animal up onto his shoulders and around his neck, and then, with a proud smile on his face, he placed his large hand on my shoulder and asked me if I thought I was ready to take the lead. I smiled and told him with much confidence that I was ready.
"Good. I was hoping you were of the age, and as I've watched you today, I am certain that this is your day. I will follow behind you as my father once followed me, for you must read the signs by yourself, just as I did when I was a young boy."
I smiled and promised that I would get us home. It was a tradition with our people, a great honor when a boy became a man in the eyes of his father. The father shows respect to the son by putting his trust in the young man he brought into the world, and the son goes before his father to break the trail for him. I felt a little taller at that moment, with his pride lifting me up. There was still plenty of daylight remaining as we began our long walk home with me in the lead. I watched the ground carefully with each step to see where we'd made footprints earlier, but it was not easy in the thick brush, so I looked for branches that we may have broken along the way. We were still a ways away from the cracked earth of the plains when my father suggested that we rest for a while beneath a shade tree and look to see what my mother had sent with us to eat. To keep ants from getting at our kill, he placed the dog onto a heavy branch that hung just above the dirt, and we ate what she'd prepared for us.
"Now don't be sad about killing that dog. It was a good thing. And though it may seem small, it will feed our family with meat left to share with our neighbors."
I could only guess that he saw me almost cry when I killed the beast, and I was grateful that he didn't laugh and that he wasn't ashamed of me. As we finished eating, he began to tell me the story of his own first hunt, and how he'd caught an antelope in a snare.
"Just as I climbed onto its back to end its life with my knife, the antelope broke free and took me for a painful ride on his back through the thicket. Before long, I fell off, and the creature got away. I came home with only a small bird that day, and your grandfather laughed himself to tears every time he retold the story to others, and with each telling, he seemed to add a bit more story to the actual truth."
We laughed together, and I admired this man more than even the day before. I appreciated that he would tell me this story now, if for no other reason than to make me feel better.
"We'd better start back now if you are ready, so we can be home in time for your mother to prepare a meal with this meat."
He stood up and hoisted the carcass back onto his broad shoulders, and once again we were off. We walked some distance farther, with my father whistling softly as he followed several steps behind me. It was taking longer with me in the lead because I was being very careful to follow in our old tracks. Each time that I turned around to see that he was still there, he was looking straight ahead instead of down at the trail, just as he said he would. I felt like a man for the first time in my life. "We will be home very soon, Father. I believe it is not much farther." He smiled when I assured him we'd be home soon. In my youth, I was foolishly trying to earn the respect that my father was already giving to me. I wanted to show him, to let him see that he'd taught me well over the years, and I wanted him to be as proud of me as I was of him. I knew that the trail would get easier once we reached the plains just ahead of us, because our tracks would be easier to see, and we could travel faster and be home before dark. Africa is a dangerous place at night, especially when you have the smell of blood on you, as we did from that dog. I'd heard stories of men who were caught away from the village after dark with a fresh kill, and it seldom turned out well for the hunters. Besides the lions, there were the leopards, wild dogs, and perhaps the worst threat of all to a man were the hyenas, who always wanted more than just the dead animal. I tried not to think about it, but I walked a little faster when I did. I began to notice strange tracks in the dirt that were like our own, yet they were somehow different. While they were like our footprints, they didn't have any toes. I'd never seen anything like them before, but I didn't want to appear fearful, so I didn't mention them to my father, since they only crossed our own tracks a few times. My pride was very big that day, and I did not want my father to think that I didn't know what I was doing after he put so much of his faith in me. I can only imagine how life would be different today if I'd only told him about them when I first noticed them, and I wished many times in my life that I could go back and relive that day in the bush again. This is a burden that I bear with each day that I breathe. Suddenly, my father stopped walking, and after getting my attention, he raised his hand to his lips to let me know to be quiet. I wondered if a lion had perhaps smelled the dog we were carrying, and I became very afraid. My heart began to pound in my ears as we stood there quiet and motionless, waiting for the danger to pass us or to confront us. I held the spear tightly in my hand so that I almost had splinters from it. Gazing deep into the bush to try and see what danger may be approaching us, I saw nothing at all until they were upon us.